So yesterday, Brian released his video about how to be a good remote manager. And he was talking about how to manage employees, in a new setting, especially given our current circumstances and the current situation where everybody's working from home. But I was starting to think about, how do you manage your freelancers and your contractors, and what makes someone a really good manager? Because when you're dealing with freelancers, you're talking about different personalities. Those people are not company employees. They kind of beat to their own drum. They have no real responsibility to you in the company. So how do you manage them effectively, and what are the things that you can do to ensure a really good relationship? So the first thing you need to do is to be flexible. And this is, it's pretty common sense, but you need to remember that there is no one size fits all approach when you're dealing with humans. They've been working a certain way. They will comply to your standards and your requirements, but they are humans, and you need to be a little flexible with how you interact with them and how you treat them. And to that point, the second thing that you need to do is to get to know your freelancers. And I know that we have a lot of projects and we have a lot of things going on, but if you take that time in the beginning of the relationship to get on the phone with them, to talk to them, to understand them, to see how they work the first time, see what you can think about for future projects and how you can kind of navigate and point them in the right direction. Because here's the thing, just because they don't do things the exact way that you do them or another freelancer does them, doesn't mean that they're not a great asset. And so you got to work with them and get to know them and find out what their flaws are and how to ask them to improve them and what their strengths are, so that you can assign them the correct pieces. My ultimate favorite tip is number 3, and that is to cushion in 2 to 5 days on every deadline you give a freelancer. I actually recently, a few freelancers said to me, "Hey, weren't you wondering why I was late on my deadline?" I said, "You know what? I'm going to be honest with you. I cushion in some days because I don't look, life happens, right? People get sick, a pandemic happens, things go on, that's life. So instead of working to a very, very tight deadline, I let them, I give them a little wiggle room. And sometimes I forget, sometimes I'm busy and I don't have time to take in a piece. So I need to cushion in that time for myself too." So number 5, when you are assigning a project to a freelancer, it is important to give them as much detail as possible. Now, everybody works a little bit differently. So sometimes, especially if you're in the content marketing world and you have clients and you need to coordinate maybe a call or an email or whatever it might be, materials, make sure that no matter what you're doing, and we'll talk a little bit more about coordinating calls and really giving the freelancer what they need. But when you do give them the materials, make sure you give them as much information as possible and kind of anticipate what they'll need as they're going along. So do they need images? Do they need sources? And maybe they need papers and PDFs, and maybe they need to know what the tone is, who the audience is. They need to understand if this is promoting a product, and give them a bigger picture view of what the entire piece is about. If a piece is going into an ebook, or it's part of a long-term, email campaign, or whatever it is, if you give them kind of that high-level view, it helps them understand and better create that piece. So give them as much information as possible. If it comes with an outline, give them an outline. If they have to create an outline, give them everything they need to create that outline. It just makes it a lot easier for you in the long run. When you are working with a freelancer on long-term projects, so maybe you have someone who creates monthly content for you, or they're part of your bigger strategy, it's helpful to use some sort of tool to collaborate. And maybe you're running 2 freelancers simultaneously, and you could even have them collaborate. It's no secret that my favorite tool is Trello. So it's often where I go and I bring freelancers and invite them onto that board so that we can post some ideas. If someone's working on something and can't get to something else, but it might be a good idea, they can, recommend it to the other freelancer, or I can put ideas up there and let whoever is available grab something. And that's more of an editorial perspective. But if you are working with one freelancer consistently, it's always helpful to have that collaboration, or that collaborative board, especially if you can attach documents and upload images and everything you can do there. With that flexibility and versatility of Trello, it's a great place to feel like you're part of a team. So I'm going to talk a little bit about feedback next. When you are providing feedback to freelancers, it is so important to provide it all at once. And I will tell you that I don't particularly like when I receive feedback from clients, in multiple emails. So I don't do that to somebody else because it's confusing, and you can make changes that are then changed by another member of the company. It's just best to collect them all, look through them, make sure you're removing any duplicate feedback, really understand what clients are asking and what you want, and then send it over to the freelancer. If you are waiting on some changes, and communicate with the freelancer, let them know, hey, I received feedback from two folks over at the company, and I'm waiting on one more. That way they can kind of schedule that in, and they know, okay, this is coming, and maybe they can carve out some time to address those changes quickly. If there's something that is something that really needs to be changed anyway, no matter what the feedback is, you can let them know, hey, just a heads up, if it's going to take longer, especially when I'm working with some of my design freelancers, if it's something that's going to take a little bit longer, I can kind of relay that information to them first, so that as the other changes come in, that's already done and they can take the rest from there. So, really understand that if you provide that feedback in various formats and at different times, it's only going to overcomplicate that process. And to that point, please make sure that your clients are not communicating directly with your freelancer, because they can start asking for the most outrageous things, and you're kind of no longer in that communication. People might leave you off the emails, and it's not about, oh, I'm afraid, they'll go and skip over me and take, the freelancer, or the freelancer will take the client. That's not even what it's about. It's really about making sure that they're not asking craziness of your freelancer. That's not your arrangement. Your arrangement, you treat your freelancer like a professional, and it's important to make sure that you're removing anything that might overcomplicate that, or give them more work, or cause them to come back and say, hey, I need more money because they asked me to do all of these other things. So always make sure that you are on that communication. And to that point, when clients do start with the scope creep, because it happens, we are humans, we start seeing things getting out of control, and things go awry, and then we wanted one thing, but then something else came up, and maybe management said one thing, but then the CEO said another. Things happen, right? So if we do see that projects are starting to change from what they were originally intended to be, it's important to communicate with your freelancer and let them know, I understand that this is changing. And if you can, if it is something outrageous, either A, you're charging the client more for it, or B, you need to adjust accordingly and compensate accordingly, because that was not part of your previous arrangement. Being fair and being human is so important in maintaining that relationship, because that freelancer, if you're good to them, they are willing to go above and beyond for you. That has always been my experience. I have worked with so many wonderful freelancers. I have been a freelancer. I understand both sides, and it is so important to give because there's only good that can come from it. When you can and if you can. And I'm always very honest with my freelancers. Look, I don't have budget. I can't go up on this one. But sometimes if I can later, I will. On a different project that I'm working with them on. Maybe I have a little wiggle room on a future project, and I'll say, you know what, let's do it for this instead, even though this is our standard rate, because you really helped me out on that piece. You're human. That's how you get a team to flourish, even if they are freelancers. Just because they are not married to your company doesn't mean that they can't be part of a team, and that's how you create that team mindset. It's important to be upfront about your expectations as well. And, if you have a deadline, and, I talked about cushioning some time in earlier, but be upfront. This piece absolutely has to be done by X date. They have a newsletter deploying. It needs to be in that newsletter. Usually I'd give you more time but I can't do it on this one. Let them know so that they know that this really is the date. They have to prioritize this. It's important. When you're working with a new freelancer, it is important to, like I mentioned earlier, get on the phone with them and talk to them, but have them do one piece and provide an outline, even if the client does not ask for an outline, even if it is a blog post and you don't really need a detailed outline. Have them put something together anyway, because you don't know what their style is yet, and you don't want them to waste their time creating a piece that is ultimately not going to be accepted. So get that outline, even if you're not sharing it with the client, which I would recommend doing anyway. Let them know, hey, this is what we're working on. We just wanted to run it by you first, as we're gathering research or something. So make sure that you are getting an outline just to get a feel. I mean, you can't get a full sense for how that writer works, but at least you're getting a feel for what will be in the piece, so it's not completely outrageous. So let's talk a little bit about payment. Be upfront in the beginning of a relationship with a freelancer or contractor or whatever they are. Let them know what your payment terms are. So we're on net 30 payment terms. Sometimes we're on net 45 payment terms. That should be in the agreement, but also relay that to them, because sometimes we don't always read our paperwork, and then invoices come in and they say, payment due in 15 days or whatever it might be, and that's just not the case. And if you are going to increase your payment terms, give them advance notice as well. Don't just do it for the next invoice. And another note about invoices, when a lot of times, and I think there are two ways to look at this, freelancers will submit their invoice with their content. Now, it's been my experience that when I submit a piece for an editorial, it's an editorial piece, it's going to be published, it's not a client piece, I will send in my invoice, because changes are usually minor, and it's kind of understood that there might be edits. When you're working on a client piece, on a content marketing piece with a freelancer, I always ask that they hold their invoice for a week. And typically you'll get feedback from the client. Hopefully you're getting feedback from the client within a week. But hold on to it, because you never know. I mean, this thing might totally have missed a mark, and they might have gone crazy, and now you got to add money to the invoice, and they want to, it's just, you never know. You just don't know what's going to happen. So, I make it very clear there is one round of revisions included in this. So I don't know if you'd feel more comfortable holding off until we get final approval. I feel more comfortable holding off until we get final approval, because, the piece is not complete yet. Now, there are times that it's a pretty straightforward piece once that relationship is going, and that the client really loves their work and it's going to kind of breeze through anyway. I will accept it. But that's that flexibility that I talked about earlier. This is not a cut and dry situation. And yes, can it get more complicated when you treat everyone like humans and not objects or robots, or, yes, it does. And you have to actually think and, anticipate what might happen. But it just makes for better relationships all around. So just a note on invoicing, if they can hold off a week. And listen, there are some clients who don't respond for weeks. Right? I've had clients that don't respond for months. So at that point, you absolutely need to pay your freelancer. There are times where things are really delaying, 3-4 weeks. And, I have some freelancers who are willing to hold off, and they're working on other things and they forget. And so I email them, I say, listen, we're not getting approval yet. It looks like it's taking forever. Why don't you send over your invoice? And if anything changes, you can submit another invoice if necessary. It's just sometimes that happens, and there's no reason that we should hold off on payment because of that. So another thing, and really the most important thing, is to be creative. And I say be creative because there are different personalities you're working with. You're working with different clients who do things different ways. You're working with different freelancers who do things different ways. So you are now trying to blend it all together and make sure that you're creating a great final product. So what I recommend is being highly creative. So sometimes, and here's what this means. So sometimes I have freelancers who love to be on client calls because they feel like they're missing out on the opportunity to ask questions in the moment and get that discussion going and see things differently and kind of bounce back and forth and brainstorm. And sometimes the clients like that too, and that's great. But sometimes the clients do not have time for that, and they don't want to be bothered with that. They just want to give us the information and send us on our way. Now, there are times that I'm on a call with a client, but I can't get the freelancer on the call. So I will actually stop and say, hey, would you mind if I record this conversation? And I'll stop the call and I'll record the conversation and send it to the freelancer along with the materials. Because having that conversation and hearing it from them and seeing what they meant and not having me be the middleman and mess it up and play telephone is a lot better for that piece. Now, another thing I've been doing is there are some people who you can just grab on the phone for 5 minutes and you get them and you say, hey, can you just say everything you need to say about this topic? And then I've sent that over as source material as well. And then there are times I can get everybody on the phone together, which is great. Sometimes there are subject matter experts in certain fields that are not the greatest writers, and that's okay, or don't have time to do that kind of thing, but they have a lot of knowledge. So I've paired a writer with a subject matter expert, and we get on the phone and we kind of talk it through, and the writer gets everything they need. And even if they're not the company's subject matter expert, I mean, these are subject matter experts that I have. And so being creative is so important. And then it's cool because they get to go back and forth and email back and forth, and it's the writer isn't really doing the research part of it, so you're also paying a little bit less to the writer, and then you're giving something to that expert, but you're pairing them together to create an expert piece. So it's all about creativity, and that's what I'm finding has worked most effectively over the course of my freelancer relationships over the years. So if you think of anything else, if you are a freelancer and there's something you absolutely love that your managers do, the editors that you work with, please share it with us. And if you are, managing freelancers and you need some help, let us know. We're always happy to talk about it. So